What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Reds Talk, an authentic football fan channel dedicated to Manchester United. Today, we had the return of a very special guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. Appreciate it.
You're on mute, so
We want plays out, and we want plays out. We want plays out, and we want plays out. We want plays out, and we want plays out.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It has been a very busy week for Manchester United in lots of other news sources, and especially this week seems like it's going to be special considering the transfer window opening on Wednesday, I think it is. Is that right? 14th Wednesday? Yeah. And then we've had all the updates with the ownership and loads of other stuff with Manchester United since we last talked. So, yeah, it's very nice to have you back on, James. Thank you for coming back on, mate.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good to be back. Enjoyed our chat last time, and always happy to join.
Yeah, and James has just dropped a video as well. I'm sure a lot of you guys come over from Muppetiers and stuff like that. But people in our community, if you want to go check that out, it's very insightful. Just finished watching it myself. So, yeah, definitely check that out. And we're going to talk about the ownership now, James. So I think it's fair to say, like I said, loads of stuff has happened. We only spoke a couple of weeks ago. But, yeah, we've had some significant updates. And we want to start with this. We're not going to talk about the Man City treble or anything like that just yet. We want to start with the important things, which is the ownership situation.
What's happened?
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. Exactly. Yesterday, as I'm sure you're very aware of, we had a significant update from Mike Keegan and the Lawton Times that the preferred bidder should be announced by the end of the week, and Qatar are now back in the race with this fifth and final take it or leave it bid, which we've heard millions of times. But first and foremost, what is your initial reaction to this, and do you genuinely feel like this is coming to an end now?
Yes and no. I have one of the things that I've tried to at least educate a little bit on in terms of the information that's out there, because personally I have the same thing, is that there's a few different camps of information where things can come from, right? In this entire process, you have the Ineos side of things. What are Ineos saying? What are they thinking? What are they putting out there? That's one perspective. You have the Qatari side of this, their perspective, what they think, and then you have what's actually going on from the Rain side and Glazers side and what they think. Similar to like a transfer, right, where you'd have reports from another country when United are chasing someone that look a lot different to reports in England, and the truth is kind of somewhere in the middle, and you don't really know until they actually put it out officially. And it's about whether or how reliable it's been. There's a few people that have been reporting on things from like the Rain perspective. And that has been like Mark Kleinman at Sky, who had the original thing out from the Glazers. He had this thing about a few weeks ago, a board meeting where the Rain group were informing the Glazers. That's probably the area where you're going to get the 100% accurate information. So if Mark Kleinman at Sky comes out, or that Financial Times article, or someone like that comes out and says the preferred bidder or the buyer is going to be named this week, I'm all in. It's happening. We can confirm. Like it's a sure thing. Lawton Times, Mike Keegan are good journalists, but when you read their pieces, what does it say? Every single one of them. It says the bidders believe that there's going to be movement this week. It says Qatari believe this. It says Ineos believe this. That's all well and good, but it's kind of like that's what they think from the outside. And so far, none of this has gone really according to anybody's plans individually. And so I think it's significant in that, Qatar obviously made their bid. They thought they had lost. They thought they were out of the race, that Ineos were about to basically wrap it up, which was essentially, I think, what I came on and said last time we spoke, that Ineos were well advancing in the talks and all that. So it just goes to show that these things can be true, but everything can change at any moment in a deal like this until it's totally and formally settled. But I think it's significant in that at least the parties feel they're at the close. And the fact of the matter is, because of the deadline, because it is really like we will not go higher bid now that's publicly out there, and that all parties, I imagine, believe this time to be true, they can't really drag it any further, can they? Because nobody's going any higher at this point. I
wouldn't put it past him, James. Like,
right.
Another ninth special extra time, 90-minute plus bid. You just like
the year is 2035, and Qatar are making the 88th bid of round. Like Jesus Christ. Yep. It's insane. You sort of touched on the question I was going to ask actually, but like maybe you can expand on it a little bit. There's a lot of, like you said, a lot of conflicting reports, a lot of stuff going back and forth. Nobody really knows what to talk about. Like, for example, the PSG story that came out about Nasser Al-Khelaifi recently. They were saying he was asked to speak to Sheikh Jassim. He's come out and said no, he hasn't. And it's funny that people are looping him because he is Qatari. So there's a lot of misinformation. When you sort of put your information out, how do you sort of discern what may be sort of bad information or what, to your eye, would be credible information when you do put it out, especially that regarding the sort of ownership situation?
Yeah, that's a real tricky question for sure. And I mean, maybe I can give a decent little bit of insight here as to, what I see from my side in building up sources that maybe I think aligns with how journalists often do things as well in speaking with some of them. So, in the process, what happens is this: you kind of have to prove it, see it to believe it with sources. It's kind of like if someone tells you something and then it comes out and it's true, and they tell you another thing and then it comes out and it's true, and they tell you another thing and it comes out and it's true, you're going to start taking their word for it because clearly they have information that is accurate at that point in time. You've established a relationship with them. You're not expecting them to lie to you. Anonymous or not anonymous, whatever the source may be, you at that point would have every right to believe them. And so journalists build up talking to people that either they know specifically and they know they'd have accurate information because of who they are, or because of past experiences and information they've been given that they do not publish, that they do not put out there, that they wait on. And then later on, as they investigate it further, they find out more. Sometimes they have hard evidence, and a lot of times they don't, right? In this industry, a lot of times they're just taking what somebody said at their word. And so it's a challenge. So for me, over the years, one of the things that I feel differently about versus all the accounts on there that are just sharing like, ITK info, that type of thing, right? They're just saying, I know this and all that. Those accounts will insist on their information being right to all evidence to the contrary and continue and push it. And the whole idea behind what I do, and I believe this is what journalists do themselves and why it's ever evolving. If you get information and it's bad, you start to write that source off and look for more sources of information that you can prove to be true. And so a lot of it's about trust. It is at the end of the day about trust. You can always be wrong. Any journalist could always be wrong, but the best ones create, collate, and find the best sources that have proven accurate over time again and again for them, so that when they speak, they have certainty that it is correct. And that's, the same thing with me. I only put things out now when I get it from people that I'm sure that their information is correct. And oftentimes, even if I've only heard it from multiple people, that I'm sure the information is correct. So that it's, coming from different areas at once. And that is also something I think people like David Ornstein do, not just take one source at their word, but double, triple check things independently to reach a same conclusion. And so you take something like this Nasser Al-Khelaifi news, it's more likely that David Ornstein is right than Nasser's telling the truth in a lot of ways, right? Because he doesn't have to say it. He doesn't have to tell the truth on it. He's not necessarily going to, because it's also important for him as a part of this whole thing to maintain that this bid is a private bid in Qatar. That's been their stance from the start, right? That it's the 9-2 Foundation, that's totally separate to QIA, to QSI, to the Qatari state, to all of that. Now you question, how can they fund everything? How can they rebuild Manchester off the back of private investment? It doesn't really make sense. But for all intents and purposes, they want to keep them separate. And so it would be meaningful to him to maintain separation, and also the conflict of interest of being so involved at PSG. Just in a matter of fact, if you own or super involved in one club, you don't want it out there. You're talking about another club that is essentially a competitor, that there's been transfers, they've played 5 times. You don't want that kind of tension. And so I would expect them to deny it. And so I think that answers your question and goes off on a bit more tangents, but
good.
No,
good.
Yeah,
that's what we're here for. I think it's important you mention that as well, because I remember when Qatar first got linked with United, or Sheikh Jassim buying the club, And I remember doing a bit of research, and that was the first name that kind of stood out that they could consult with someone like Nasser Al Khalifa. So this isn't a thing, and I'm sure you put it out yourself as well, that's just new news. Like, this has been ongoing for a while, but David Ornstein's a very credible journalist. He obviously had his reasons for putting it out there. So, yeah, completely get that. I want to kind of, we discussed it at the start, Man City's certain treble, whatever you want to call it. Not that many people kind of respect it or whatever you want to call, but it's the narrative that's being put out after all the aftermath of City winning this and stuff is the fact that we need state ownership to compete with the likes of Man City and eventually Newcastle. What are your personal thoughts on this?
I understand it. I mean, it's clearly understandable when you take a look at it and you look at Manchester City's squad. When you look at what they're building, what they've done, how they've done it, the players that they've obtained, all of that. But the facts tell you that Manchester United have spent as much money as Manchester City have. They've just essentially pissed it away for the most part due to poor planning, poor decision-making. And that does 100% come down to the owners. It's not like it's letting the Glazers off the hook or anything like that. It's the reverse. I'm one of the few people who indicated very strongly for years now how specifically and directly Joel Glazer influences the club's direction in terms of every single decision that is made, in terms of transfers, hires, all of that. I know for a fact how involved he is and how everything has to go to him and how he makes all of those calls. And it's not left up to the people that succeed. You think, the Sheik owns Manchester City, who's attended his second game in 14 years, at this Champions League final, makes any decisions about the club? No.
Newcastle as well. The guy at Newcastle. You don't see him. Like,
no
they've
way.
got a team. They've got a team there doing all the stuff.
They have nothing to do with it. It's run by, City is run extremely competently by by the board they put in place to manage it. It's one of the best run clubs ever, and it's still taking them 14 years to win a Champions League, their first one. And that's the funny part about it is a few things, right? One can overreact to certain trophies. Of the biggest 10 net spenders in Europe, only 3 have a Champions League in the last 10 years, which is Chelsea, Barcelona, and Manchester City. While there's a lot of other clubs that have spent a lot of money. Madrid you would think would be up there, but they sell extremely well, so their net spend is actually quite a bit lower. Again, super well run, not state owned. Barcelona not state owned. Chelsea not really state owned. I mean, the connections between Roman and Russia are there, but not in essence, not funded by, the state. Sir Jim Ratcliffe's more wealthy than Roman Abramovich is. Regardless, it's a matter of competency, and that's something I in the video I put out earlier, I was talking a lot about, is making the right decisions, doing the right things, putting the right people in place to make the calls that's most important. And if the Glazers hadn't sucked $1 billion out of the club on these debt repayments and all of that and dividends over the years, the stadium would be funded too. The other added factor that continues to evolve is, of course, FFP. This year, it's a 90%, the level of spending compared to revenue. Next year, 80%. The following year, 70%. And then UEFA are discussing a hard cap that's almost an American-style hard cap on salaries, wages, and football expenses, where no matter how big your revenue grows, it's going to cap. It's going to be a high cap, but it's essentially supposed to prevent City from eventually ballooning to $1.5 billion a year in revenue that they can then spend all of, right? But keep it at a level that keeps it close. And it's also going to drive prices down and help the whole football pyramid, where clubs at the bottom aren't paying $50 million for transfers that used to be 10. And so there's those factors. And then you even have today, the Times putting out an exclusive that the Premier League is looking at a salary cap based on TV revenue. So it's not even revenue that can be controlled by the clubs themselves, but by the revenue from the TV deals. And so there's a lot of things that are coming into place that are going to limit spending to where, yes, you can still spend a lot of money. You still need to have the club have a lot of revenue, but evidence shows United can fund that itself if it's not being, having the life sucked out of it, and if competent people are running it. That's always going to be more important than anything else.
It's a super chat from Big Dre. Sir Jim Radcliffe hires mates and friends. This is not the direction of the club to go. So people are making their voices heard. Appreciate the super chat, mate. Thank you for that.
Sam?
I thought you wanted to say something else, Nick. Never mind.
No, I was just actually going to mention the kind of Premflix. I don't know if you've seen it, the Premflix thing that's on the basically the subscription thing that they want to do, £10 a month for Premier League football rather than the £100 you spend for Sky Sports, BT, things like that. I thought that was an interesting thing that I was reading about before, that they could potentially dive into that, and then God knows how commercial deals work with that and financials and stuff. But I don't want to dive too much into that because it's kind of like a subtopic. So Sam, I'll let you.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of like follow on from the sort of state ownership thing. Like, I personally am against state ownership. It's not a Qatari thing. It's not a sort of country thing. It's just literally, I don't want a government running the football club. Like, I've seen what's happened to City. Yeah, they've got success, but I just feel like there's no soul to it. It's all very synthetic. It's already just by the numbers, robotic. Like, even in the way, like, you see Haaland, he's like the embodiment of what Manchester City is at this point. Just a robot with zero emotion, just machine-like scoring goals. That's what the club is to me. And Newcastle seems to be going in a similar vein. And I just think it's losing something within football. Do you think this is just what's got to happen now in football? Like, in order for clubs to be successful, they're going to have to be state-owned, they're going to have to be state-funded? Or do you think there is still room for, say, a team like Brighton to do something, or a team like Ajax, the way they do things, bring people through academies, shrewd buy-ins, building them up slowly? Do you think there's room for that, or do you think it's all just going to go to sort of state-funded clubs now?
I think that this is an interesting thing, because I was thinking about it because of City's, what's happened, and the 115 charges and all of that are there. The UEFA ban they had that got lifted, all of the things that have gone on. And yeah, I mean, in agreement with what you've said, I've stated I'm also against state ownership, and I've tried to make the explanation to people. If Joe Biden and the U.S. government rocked up to Old Trafford, make a purchase, are you kidding me? I'd be so against it.
I don't want the British government involved as an American. In football.
I have no desire for them to be involved at all. I would think it was a travesty of the highest proportions. It's just, I don't want state ownership. I don't think governments should be involved in the sport. That's my opinion on it in that regard. Yeah. In terms of your question about, is it going that way? Does it have to go that way? I mean, you have one state-owned club that has won a Champions League. That's it. Just one.
Good point.
So clearly it's not all gone that way. They've owned it a long time. PSG have been owned a long time. They still can't make it over the hump.
But it's a one-team league in France now, though, isn't it? Essentially, it is, and that's the way Germany is as well. Like, I know they're not state-owned by me,
and that's not state. Yeah, and they have the 50-51, the 50-50 rule there, and it's still, or the 51-49 rule there, and it's still a one-team league, and that it really doesn't have so much to do with the ownership, but rather the dynamics of the leagues and all of that. But one of the things that I personally think, the whole Super League fiasco was a pushback against state ownership. In essence, it was Madrid, some of these clubs, United, etc., getting involved and saying, we don't like that it's being pushed this way. Some of their ideas have literally been taken by UEFA and implemented. When it first came out, I wasn't a big fan of the Super League for certain reasons of the structure, but they had some ideas that I thought were intelligent or necessary and that were going to happen no matter what. I was talking about it back then a long time ago, like these spending caps, like these percentages based on revenue caps. They had those built into the Super League setup. And UEFA has gone and said, all right, we've got it, getting everybody back. Get rid of this Super League. We don't want it anymore. Obviously, all the challenges that went through it, everybody dropped out. But they brought in some of those ideas, and they're taking them even further and further. And I think what you'll actually see with this City thing, in my opinion, is a bit of almost like a blowback in the reverse direction. Because it's like the biggest example of this state ownership, sports washing type of thing, with the 115 charges levied against them, with this ongoing case, with all of that, to where you're going to see a bigger push from a lot of other clubs against it. That's going to turn things a bit. And I think that's why you're seeing things like the Premier League, looking at this spending cap on salaries and the further hard caps, and why it's still being under discussion is because they know they have to do something about it now, or they're going to keep having issues with clubs like Madrid, with clubs like Barcelona, with clubs like, Liverpool, with clubs like, Arsenal and and all the Italian clubs. I mean, come on. They made it to the finals. Now they've struggled so much financially over the years, these Italian clubs. They need a restructure for them to survive. They need it. They need these caps in place because they're just not making it otherwise. And so I do think you see kind of a big pushback in the other direction now. That does even the playing field a little bit. It's always still going to be the big clubs do the best and the people with the most revenue do the most. But I think it's going to have a ceiling, and it's not an endless, arms race towards, an infinite conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Because it just feels like that at the moment, like with the Premier League. Obviously, we're not complaining because the Premier League is our home league. It's fantastic, it's amazing. You've got all the best players there, etc. But it does feel like that now. The Premier League is going like that, and then Serie A, La Liga, League One. You look at the revenue figures for League One. It's just absolutely shambles.
They suspended it, didn't they, during COVID? Because money-wise, it just wasn't worth too much money to keep going rather than thing. Whereas the Premier League carried on because there was money to be made. So.
Yep. Well, they had trouble with the TV deals, and their main broadcaster didn't want to pay or something like that too.
Yeah. Well, out of everything we've been discussing with the ownership, finances, and stuff like that, it's all going to play a significant part in terms of transfers and how we move forward as a club, especially with, if it does get announced this week that whoever it is who's taken over is happening. I wanted to ask you about the goalkeeper situation. Seen a lot of news recently. David Raya to Spurs, apparently he's close. Diogo Costa, very pricey. And then you got Jordan Pickford, who's apparently a genuine option. Or is this kind of just usual transfer crap, do you think, with the Pickford situation?
With Pickford, probably. It doesn't really fit the idea of what they're trying to do age-wise and all of that. I can't really see that. Obviously, he's England's number one, and
for now
he's gonna have to. For now, but he is England's number one.
I think Pope might take that from him very soon.
I think he
there's
should.
a good chance of that. I think there's a good chance. I mean, Pickford's been definitely better for England than he has for
sure.
Oh yeah, so's Maguire, right?
Yeah, so's Maguire, exactly. And so it's a tricky situation. The thing with this goalkeeper stuff is hard. I've been talking about it for a long time that they were going to re-sign De Gea, and it was I know it's still inching towards that June 30th. Obviously, they've talked about it, contracts on the table, but not quite signed off on. They have intended to re-sign De Gea and sign a keeper. That's been the goal for a long time. Ten Hag initially. Dean Henderson was going to come back. He didn't want to come back. He gave the whole interview about not coming back unless he was going to be sure number one.
I'm a caged animal.
Ten Hag, if he sees me, he's going to play me. He's just like, okay, mate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all right, well then, what are you worried about? But no, I know. Yeah. And so the thing is, it's messy because it feels like there's a shift. And I know United have been looking at keepers all year. Of different prices and quantities. They
scouted Costa how many times? A ridiculous amount of times.
I mean, every single game he's played in Portugal, they've been scouting and they've been present. Yeah. And they did the same with Bruno Fernandes years ago, and then didn't sign him, and then did sign him 4 months later. But and so it's they're half in, half out, and nobody knows what they're going to do. And I think it all comes down to budget. It all comes back to the budget. It comes down to the takeover. It comes down to the Glazers. They have to get the striker in. That's for sure. They have to get the midfielder in. That's for sure. Can the budget stretch to goalkeeper? And then what quality of goalkeeper can it bring in? And so I think they're exploring it. And as I mentioned earlier, but they're exploring if they can get Diogo Costa for lower than his release clause, which is a fairly significant, 80 million euros or 75 million euros or something like that. They're exploring if a deal is viable around 50 million because of Porto's financial difficulties, which are very excessive. At the moment, they need to sell, they need to raise money. So they're at least exploring that and looking at it and seeing if it's, viable at that level. So I think if they feel like they could get a deal there, then we could see something change. I think they don't want to lose De Gea, and I know a lot of people disagree with this. I don't think they want to lose De Gea and not be able to get in a top goalkeeper like Costa. And so he'd rather keep De Gea if it means maybe they can, if it's looking like they could only get like a young goalkeeper for 10, 15 million who may not be ready yet. So it's like it's a little bit of like, you know, all swings and roundabouts with the whole situation. That all comes back to the budget and the takeover at the end of the day, really.
Yeah. I suppose there's one refreshing thing is though that there's work being done behind the scenes. It feels like this season that for plan A, plan B, plan C's, a lot of people were looking at. But with United, I always feel like there's going to be a certain position neglected, regardless of whoever it is we're going to go for. What are the most important areas to target, in your opinion, and who's most likely to fill them areas as it stands, do you think?
The most likely areas that would make a signing?
Yeah, so the talk. I remember that the Athletic, for example, they released something a couple of months ago. They was talking about they're going to look for a striker, number 8, and then a right back, and then that's obviously changed now, the right back situation. So, do you think it's centre back, centre mid, striker, and who would your personal preference be?
Yeah, I think those 3 are the most likely. I think those 3 are the most likely in order. Striker, like, there's no chance they don't sign a striker this year. Let's put it that way.
Have to.
That's the position. There's zero chance. It's been so long. I mean, the last one we really purchased was Romelu Lukaku, and it's like.
I mean, are you telling me you don't want Weghorst for another season, James? Is that what you're saying?
No, I do not want Weghorst for another season. I don't think I could take it, honestly.
I don't want Lukaku again. I don't want Lukaku again after that finishing on Saturday. Jesus Christ.
Got his Timberland boots on. Jesus.
Oh my God. But yeah, striker, I think the most likely signing is Rasmus Højlund. Quite significantly so, due to the nature of the whole thing. You've seen he's making comments now about commenting no comments about connection to United.
He's moved agencies as well, hasn't he, to Ten Hag's. So.
Yeah, and that's just for the summer, by the way. That is just for the summer. That switch to SCG is just for the summer. I can say that. It is just for the window, and that has happened. You have players who do that. It's not that uncommon. They make a switch to an agency just for the summer, usually, and that's when the contract is for. Like, it's till the end of the window, and generally that's for if they intend to get a deal done, and then often they'll sign with them longer term afterwards. But that is usually the reason why, and so one could read into that. Certainly, but it is specifically to get a move this summer. Let's put it that way. So yeah, I think that one is by far the most likely because Harry Kane is very, very unlikely.
Tough. Yeah.
But I think that as well with my preference would be Victor Osimhen or Gonzalo Ramos as the main 2 names. I want a young striker. I think Harry Kane is amazing. Is probably the best player on the list, but at the same time, I really don't want to be here talking about buying a striker again in 2 or 3 years because it's been such a problem of buying this. You know, we actually have a pretty old squad in terms of the top players, not in the overall age, but Eriksen, Casemiro, Bruno, De Gea, Varane. These are not young players. Our spine is pretty old. I don't want to have it continue to be, relative age old, but I don't want it to continue to be signing 29, 30, 31-year-olds for the spine, where then we have this problem. We could do with a few, but it really does have to be a nice blend. So I think Højlund, and then I think they'll keep looking through the window at Kane, at Ramos, at these other names in case, and especially if the money stretches. In the midfield, Mason Mount is the most likely by far, no doubt about it. The other names are disappearing from the list pretty quickly, right? McAllister was the other one they really wanted, who's been signed. Kudus is very expensive, not really a midfielder.
Rabiot's gone quiet, hasn't he? He's gone quiet. I've not heard much about that for a while.
It has, and he'll be, free agent on July 1, so we'll see about that. He's probably assessing offers. I think that Amrabat is an interesting one as well for the 6. Ten Hag really likes him. And if he doesn't get that offer from Spain, very, very viable rotation for Casemiro, for sure. No doubt about it. And then at center back, I think it's likely a center back is signed if Harry Maguire is sold, but there really isn't a guarantee of that. I mean, it's significant wages that'll have to be paid off. They'd want a good fee because otherwise they're losing money selling him. And, it doesn't really help calculations. Again, takeover pending, right? It's like it gets easier if things happen there. And I think a goalkeeper of some sort will 100% be signed this summer too. We don't know what kind yet because Dean Henderson is very likely to leave, right? No matter what happens. He's just not.
And
like
that's important for FFP implications, right? As well.
Yeah. He's great money for United on FFP. If Dean Henderson is sold for 30 million, it's huge.
Yeah.
And so Dean Henderson is likely to leave, right? One of Dean Henderson or De Gea is leaving, right? At least one of them is leaving, like almost no matter what. I don't think we go into a season with Tom Heaton as our only other goalkeeper again. Obviously, his contract is expiring. I don't think they'll re-sign him. Kovar is really well rated, but he wants to keep playing. A bit too young to come in yet and start for United. He wants to keep playing, which is the smart move. So yeah, I think striker, then midfielder, like an 8, and then after that, it's all on the balance of probabilities. But my preferences across the board would be like Osimhen, Gonzalo Ramos, Mount. I actually really like for the 8 position for the role that we're talking about. I actually grown onto that one incredibly. Amrabat, I think, would be a very good choice deep. I don't think you could do someone like Caicedo in that role who's not going to be starting. I don't see why he would join United in that situation. And then at center back, I don't know. I don't really have much of a preference on who they sign there because I think Varane and Martinez are by far the best center backs that we have and will be regardless of who we sign. And then goalkeeper, Diogo Costa. Out and away, Diogo Costa, I would just over the moon if we could sign him. He has all the traits that we've been desperately missing. He's absolutely incredible at them. So
it's almost identical to my list. That. Sorry, Sam. Just before you go into yours, we've got 300 people in the chat. Please do smash like on the video. We appreciate you've all come over. A lot of you have come over, at least from the Muppetiers and James's community stuff. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you are new here. Sam?
Yeah, please do. The last thing I want to touch on: United really terrible at selling players. Like I can't remember. I think the last player we sold for profit was Dan James. I think that's the most recent one I can remember we actually sold for a profit. This summer, we need to be absolutely clinical in selling players in order to sort of match FFP and have extra funds available to rebuild the squad. Do you think that's possible this summer? Do you think we're able to sell players who've got some value and sell them for good money? Or do you think we just need to take the hit, sell as many as possible so we can refresh this squad and take out all these players that are not good enough? And why do you think it's so difficult for United to do this? Like City are able to do it really well. Brighton are able to do it really well. Like a bunch of teams are able to do it really well. We just have never been good at it. Have you got any sort of insight into why we're so bad at it?
I have a couple of theories on this. Number one is that we tend to. It's kind of like it all really I think stems from the Glazers in general, and it's easy to pin it up there. But there's an aspect to like value that they see where they look at the players and say, well, if this player could be good, we want to hold on to them because it could stop us from having to spend in the future. So then they don't sell them, right? One of the reasons that City, Brighton, these clubs are able to sell so well, obviously Brighton sell players who have kind of made it, right? And they're up there. We're not selling players who have made it and who are integral to the team because why would we? Because we're trying to build that top team. But I was discussing this with someone recently. Clubs like Chelsea and City tend to be able to get a lot of revenue from young players that have not really broken through. And the reason is they sell them. They sell a lot of really promising young players when they're promising, and a lot of them go on to be successful. Lukaku, De Bruyne. I mean, look at the people that have left from Chelsea over the years. It's amazing. And the people who have left from City over the years that have gone on to have careers. How many successes have left United? How many times have United sold a young player that's gone on to be successful or have left United and become successful? Of the recent players, James Garner's one we sold for a profit, obviously. He barely even made it into the Everton side last year, It was the right call to sell him, of course. That's an example. There was high hopes before. But then, Januzaj, Angel Gomez, it's not like we have a lot of people who've gone on from United. So when clubs look at United's young players, they don't say, oh, here's a diamond in the rough that's going to be a star one day that we're going to turn a huge profit on. So we'll pay good money for them like they will to City. They'll pay nobodies 20 million. They'll pay 20 million to City for nobody because they have so many products that have come out of there. Same for Chelsea. We don't have that. And so it's a kind of a fundamental problem with young players at United that the good ones are not sold when they should be, and they end up kind of rotting a lot of times if they don't make it into the first team and stunting their development. So a lot more clinical decision has to be made on the young players. we do have a good blend this year. We have players like Dean Henderson, who it's like you've got to sell now. It's an example, right? You've got to sell him now. After this, it's like either he's your number one at United or his value is going to diminish year over year and it's going to become worse and worse. You've got to sell him now. He probably should have been sold after that season at Sheffield. You know, his last season at Sheffield, where he was like top of the world at that time, looked at as a fantastic keeper instead of getting 10 games when De Gea was, you know, stuck in Spain or something like that. He should have been sold at that time if we were going to get the 50 million that Tottenham were offering and move on. You know,
Jesse
that's
Lingard
what should have happened.
Jesse Lingard.
Jesse Lingard. Yeah, he could have been sold a long time ago.
West Ham offered what, 20 odd million, 25 million, 30 million. Like, just take it. Like, he's 25.
Every time we think a player has promised, we just bring him right back in instead of selling him, and then it doesn't work out. So I think that is an area that has to be way, way more ruthless in that regard. But we have at least Dean Henderson now. He has to be sold. McTominay, his ceiling is not where he's going to be a top player for the team. If you get a 30 million offer, 25 million, you sell. You sell and replace. We don't need to hold on to these players, you know, and then you let players like Fred's contract expire next year and Eriksen expire next year, and you don't keep extending them like we did with Matic and Mata past their expiration date. You know, those are the key things that help FFP, obviously clearing those wages off over the long run. So there's a mix this year of players who could be really good sales and ones we just have to bite the bullet on, like Tellez and, you know, and Bailly and probably Anthony Elanga, who now has, if we told him at the end of last summer, probably could have gone for 25 million.
Exactly.
He had promised, he scored a Champions League goal, then he's got nothing this season. Now he's worth 10 million. But now we have to bite the bullet because there's really no other way. And so, much more proactive would help.
And that's where it comes down to being run as a competent club, doesn't it? Like, that's just the past 10, 12 years, whatever you want to call it, we've just been run so poorly. And it's nice to see again, like I was discussing before about the plan A, B, C targets, trying to sell players at the start of the window, because I feel like United always do it at the end. You don't hear about outgoings until the very end once we've got players in. So that's at least nice. If we've got time for a couple of questions, we can read them out, Sam, if there's any on idiot ones.
If you're in the chat, like, drop your questions. I'll pick the good ones, not the absolute ridiculous ones. One from Chivy there. Great show, guys. Appreciate James's ability to separate his opinion from news and rumor, etc. So that's a nice comment there. I'm just looking through. This chat's going so quickly, so bloody quickly.
Well, let me ask just one question whilst you're looking, Sam. Look, predictions are very hard, James, to make, especially with this ownership situation. If you was to make a bold prediction as to where this may go over the next couple of weeks, what do you think? Like I said, I understand it's very hard, but what do you think over the next couple of weeks? Will it come to an end at least, if it's not this week, maybe a couple of weeks after that?
Yeah, I think it will come to a conclusion within the next, 2 weeks. I think it will. I do think it will, because I don't think there's more changes possible from the bidders side, and that as long as they've been able to get more from the bidders, the process won't end. It's about the money, right?
Yeah.
And since that is essentially at its end now, the only thing I'd want to add in an extension to this, just real briefly, because I was thinking about it as well, with Qatar's new offer, the one thing people have somewhat ignored is the possibility of the Glazers going to Ineos and again asking them for more money, like they've been doing back and forth the whole time.
Yeah.
And that could, if Ineos decide then to raise their offer again, which they very well could, they haven't had to. That hasn't really been mentioned, but why wouldn't Ineos at this stage, after this far in, go up a little bit more if they need to continue to stay in the lead? And do they then go back to Qatar and ask them one more time and say, hey,
never
that's
ending.
the type of thing
Never ending.
That's the type of thing that the Glazers could do, in this process. But I don't think so. I think it is a matter of what we've done in the next couple of weeks, and the bids are essentially at this point really, final. But actually.
Ahmed is, are you hopeful of fast transfer dealings once the takeover happens?
Yeah, I do. And I think in another way, we'll see similar to last year, where we had like 3 or 4 different ones lined up, and then suddenly, after it took a long time, they just went, like Martinez.
It's like a domino effect, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's going to happen anyway, even without the takeover, I think you'll see moves like Hoyland and Mount come through real quickly all of a sudden when it's time, but it would certainly speed up if the takeover was done.
Yeah, that was the next question I was just put up, but you just touched on that. What is the likelihood price for the Mount deal? Will United and Chelsea come to a compromise?
I think it'll be in the end around that 55 million mark. Yeah, that's what they're looking for. I think in the end, that's what it'll come down to. There's probably be, the Ballon d'Or add-on in there, the famous one put in, and that type of thing. But 55
the famous
in
clause.
the end.
The famous clause.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Do you think Timber makes way more sense than Kim because he can cover at right back, allows us to play as a right-sided centre back in the 3-4-3 next year? That's from Tom.
Yeah, I do. I think he's way more flexible personally in there, and since it's not guaranteed starting minutes, I think having a flexible player is more likely.
I just want Timber in just so I can do that chant.
Oh, you want? Yeah, you want
Mikesha chant.
That's
all I care about.
Mohamed, when do you think we'll have full flexibility in the transfer window? When the agreement is reached or when the takeover is complete?
Yeah, I think when the agreement is reached, they'll be able to move forward under the current budget, like a little more swiftly, but then it will accelerate further after they actually complete the takeover, if it's in time.
Couple of shouts on anything on Bart Verbruggen, the goalkeeper.
So he didn't want to join United because of playtime, right? Being a young keeper who wants to start in his next position, and I think that's why Burnley are ahead on that one. I think that one was pretty publicly from someone who knows that there's a report out there, and I think that's accurate. I haven't heard much on him myself, but yeah, I think that's accurate. I think he wants to start next year and wouldn't necessarily do so with David De Gea.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's an absolute storm coming through my window then. That was literally a storm through the window. It's madness. Yeah, I think, Sam, we can wrap it up there with that thing. Am I lagging a little bit? Because I'm lagging on my screen here. So
yeah, a little bit throughout the thing, but we're at the end now,
I can only apologise about that. So. Yeah, sorry about that. James, as always, been an absolute pleasure. Very insightful. That's why we love having you on, because can you hear this storm, by the way?
Yeah, I can hear it. It's coming through on the audio.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm about to get taken out. Yeah, sorry. We absolutely appreciate you coming on. Very insightful and learn everything every time you're on the show. So always welcome back on whenever you want. You already know this. But yeah, just thank you for coming on, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Cool.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you as well, obviously.
Always. Anytime. Just hopefully your window doesn't get put through by the sounds of it. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I might see you guys next time, depending on how bad this storm gets. But I'll see you a lot in the next one. Take care, guys.
Peace.